Rain finally ceases, and the heavy wooden hull of an ark grinds to a violent halt against jagged rock. But if you look closer at the unbroken pattern of elevation from Genesis to Revelation, at what actually transpires the moment. He came to the mountain of fire expecting the God of fire. He wanted the dramatic, earth-shattering power of the Exodus. He wanted fire from the sky to consume his political enemies. He wanted the thundering voice that terrified the Israelites. But God shifts the paradigm. The Dimama changes the rules of the elevation. The mountain is not a theater for raw, destructive power. It is a sanctuary for the whisper. God proves he controls the wind. He proves he controls the earth. He proves he controls the flame. But he chooses to speak in the silence. Ararat was the womb. Moriah was the gaze. Sinai was the wedding. Horeb is the whisper. 4 peaks, 4 revelations, 4 timeline-altering encounters. But the deeper you go into the ancient Hebrew mindset, the more you realize these are not isolated geographic locations. There is a linguistic secret buried in the text. It hides inside the very word for mountain itself, and it connects every single summit into one massive, cosmic architecture. If you trace the geography of the Hebrew Bible, you will find yourself constantly out of breath. The text pushes us upward over 500 times. From the heavy wooden ark settling in Genesis to the gleaming city descending in Revelation, the biblical authors cannot stop talking about the peaks. Human feet leave the valley and step onto an incline. You start to see a deliberate design that the casual reading completely misses. The word they use, appearing relentlessly across the ancient scrolls, is the Hebrew har. It translates simply as mountain, hill, or mount. But if we read it with a modern Western mind, we strip it of its weight. We see a geological formation created by tectonic plates, violently grinding together over millennia. We see a massive pile of rock, ice, and dirt. But in the ancient Near Eastern imagination, Har carried a much heavier, more terrifying reality. In the ancient world, the temple and the mountain were the exact same thing. The prophet Ezekiel proves this when he looks back at the very first pages of Genesis. In Ezekiel chapter 28, he does not describe the Garden of Eden as a flat, lush agricultural valley. He explicitly calls it the holy mountain of God. Eden was a high place. When Adam and Eve are exiled, they are walking down. They are descending into the dusty flatlands of mortality, driven away from the summit, where heaven and earth physically overlapped. This is why the temple in Jerusalem was built on the steep incline of Mount Zion. The architecture of the ancient temple was designed specifically to replicate the ascent of a mountain. As a priest walked deeper into the sanctuary, stepping up heavy stone stairs, passing walls carved with palm trees, and inhaling the rich, thick scent of burning cedar, the mountain is not a location. It is an architecture. It is the terrifying, beautiful collision point where the realm, he was symbolically climbing back up to Eden. He was ascending the Har. That ancient linguistic connection changes everything about how we read these stories. Har is not a geographic description. It is a theological coordinate. Every time a patriarch or a prophet climbs a mountain in the biblical text, they are temporarily stepping back into the garden. They are crossing the boundary line into the cosmic temple. Ararat, Moriah, Sinai, Horeb, these are not random, isolated locations. They are the exact same sanctuary, revealing different angles of the exact same God. But the architecture of the mountain was always pointing forward. It was waiting for a moment when the divide between heaven and earth would not just be temporarily bridged, but permanently shattered. Centuries after Elijah heard the whisper in the cave, 3 tired fishermen follow their rabbi up a steep, rocky incline in the northern region of Galilee. They are shivering in the cold night air, expecting nothing more than another quiet evening of prayer in the dirt. But the rabbi is about to show them what actually lives inside the temple. The incline is brutal. The night air is freezing. 3 fishermen stumble up the rocky path. Their lungs ache in the thin altitude. Their legs burn from the climb. They collapse in the loose dirt. They pull their heavy wool cloaks tight against the wind of the heavens crashes into the dirt of the earth. In the ancient Near Eastern mind, the cosmos is a physical structure. They fall heavy with sleep. They think it is just another night of prayer. They think the summit is just a quiet place to rest. Then the darkness shatters. A blinding light erupts on the high ridge. It does not come from the sky. It comes from inside the rabbi. His face burns brighter than the midday sun. His woven clothes flash like white lightning. The text says he is transfigured. The Greek word is metamorpho, a complete physical alteration of reality. The veil of human flesh is momentarily pulled back. He is not reflecting divine glory. He is radiating it. Jesus is not just standing on the cosmic temple. He is the cosmic temple. Two figures step out of eternity into the blinding glare. Moses and Elijah, the lawgiver and the prophet, the man who endured the fire of Sinai, the man who survived the whisper of Horeb. They are the mountain men. They have stood on the peaks of revelation before. They know exactly what the high ground demands. But this time, they are not hiding in a cleft of rock. They are not listening to a violent wind. They are talking to the God of the mountain. Wrapped in human skin, a thick, radiant cloud descends. A heavy, glowing mist swallows the peak. It is the exact same cloud that covered Sinai. Peter, James, and John fall face down in the freezing dirt. Their eyes water from the impossible glare. You have the skies above, the land in the middle, the chaotic waters beneath, and the mountain is the bridge. Sheer terror pins them to the rock. They cannot breathe. A voice vibrates through the stone beneath them. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. The entire Old Testament architecture collides in this single moment. Ararat's womb, Moriah's substitute, Sinai's wedding, and Horeb's whisper, all of it is violently pulled into the present. The elevation has finally reached its ultimate purpose. Heaven and earth are perfectly fused in the body of a Jewish carpenter. Then the light snaps off. The cloud lifts. The cold, dark night returns. Jesus reaches down and touches their shaking shoulders. He tells them not to be afraid, and he leads them back down into the valley. The transfiguration proves the pattern. The mountain is where the divine crashes into the mortal. But the architectural design of the Bible demands one final ascent. The timeline of human history needs one last and permanent fracture, and the final peak will not be covered in blinding light. It will be covered in blood. A small, rocky outcropping shaped like a human skull sits just outside the stone walls of Jerusalem. We do not usually think of Golgotha as part of the grand mountain architecture. It is not majestic like the high, sweeping ridge of Ararat. It does not touch the storm clouds like the towering peaks of Sinai. It is a lowly, ugly limestone hill. It is a public execution ground. It is the pillar holding up the dome of the sky. It is the place where the boundary between the divine, placed intentionally close to a busy road, choked with the smell of dried blood, human waste, and the thick heat of the Judean afternoon. But if you look at the anatomy of what happens on this limestone rock, you realize it is the climax of the entire geographical pattern. Golgotha is not a random site of Roman execution. It is the anti-mountain. It is the dark mirror of every high place that came before it. The cosmic temple is violently inverted so that the separation between the realms can be permanently destroyed. On Ararat, the mountain provided a physical refuge from the chaotic waters of death, saving a family from the apocalypse. On Golgotha, the chaotic waters of death are allowed to completely wash over the Son of Man, drowning him in the apocalypse of our rebellion. On Moriah, a substitute ram was caught by its horns in a tangled thicket to spare the life of the beloved Son. On Golgotha, the beloved Son wears the tangled thicket as a crown of thorns tearing into his scalp, and no voice from heaven cries out to drop the knife. The blade falls. The blood is spilled on the unhewn stone. On Sinai, God descended in thick smoke and fire to speak a covenant of life to his terrified bride. On this hill, and the mortal wears dangerously thin. When God wants to speak, when a covenant needs to be cut, when the timeline, the sky turns to a suffocating, unnatural black at noon, and the heavens go completely silent, allowing the curse of the broken covenant to crush the groom. On the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus radiated blinding, unapproachable light, dropping his friends to the ground with the sheer weight of his glory. Here, he is stripped naked, beaten, unrecognizable, and pinned to the rough, splintering grain of a wooden beam while his friends abandon him in the dark. The architecture of the ancient Hebrew world demanded this final, devastating ascent. If the Har is the place where heaven and earth collide, Golgotha is the place where heaven is violently torn apart so that the earth can finally be healed. God takes the high ground by letting the lowlands crush him. The ultimate revelation of his character does not happen in the blinding glory of the summit, but in the brutal, humiliating descent of the cross. And this is where the entire geographic journey of the biblical text steps out of the ancient history of the Middle East and lands right at your feet. The mountain was never meant to be a permanent residence. You cannot build a shelter on the summit and stay there forever. The elevation is not an escape from reality. It is the calibration for it. The revelation is given on the high ridge of human history is fracture and reset. It almost never happens in the valley. The valley is for wandering, so that it can be carried down into the chaos of the flatlands. Look back at the peaks we have climbed. Mount Ararat, settled and a drowning world, found a clean womb to start over. Mount Moriah held the knife, and the divine gaze provided a substitute in the thorns. Mount Sinai burned with smoke, and an anxious nation entered a wedding covenant with their king. Mount Horeb went completely still, and a broken prophet found a sanctuary in the heavy whisper. The Mount of Transfiguration erupted with light, and 3 fishermen saw the cosmic temple wrapped in human flesh. The hill of Golgotha turned to blackness, and the groom took the curse of the valley to destroy the separation forever. And the holy city on the mount waits in eternity to bring a scattered humanity back into the garden of God. One continuous architecture, one unchanging God. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the exhaustion of the ascent itself. The text never pretends the climb is easy. It requires Moses to leave the camp behind. It demands that Elijah walk for 40 days through a scorching wilderness. It forces 3 tired fishermen to drag their aching bodies up an incline in the dead of night. The mountain requires you to leave the comfort of the valley, your lungs burning in the thinning air, carrying nothing but your questions. The valley is for war. The valley is where you pitch your tent. But the revelation requires a climb, and your desperation directly into the thick cloud. If you are in a season right now where your life feels like a barren wilderness, where your circumstances are shaking and you are hiding in a dark cave begging for an exit, look closer at the geography of your pain. Your isolation is not a punishment. Your wilderness is not an abandonment. It is an invitation to ascend. God is resetting the terrain of your life, pulling you away from the noise of the flatlands because he is about to fracture your timeline and reveal a deeper layer of his character than you could have ever perceived in the safety of the plains. He is changing your elevation. And may the God, who meets his people in the heavy silence, walk up the steep incline with you, burning away your fears in the fire of his presence, and bring you down the other side, carrying a glory that cannot be unmade. If this opens something deep for you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is currently walking through a difficult valley. And pray for us as we keep digging into these ancient texts. Keep climbing, because the sanctuary is waiting in the cloud. Every time humanity is about to receive a new blueprint for existence, someone has to make a devastating ascent. An old man raises a hunting knife over an altar of unhewn stones. The cold wind whipping across an isolated ridge. They have to walk up into the clouds, their lungs burning in the thinning air, leaving the safety of the flatlands behind. And they never come back down the same. The elevation changes them. The encounter leaves a permanent mark. You can trace the entire story of redemption without ever looking at the cities. the empires, or the plains. You can trace it summit by summit, peak by peak. But to feel the weight of this pattern, you cannot start with Sinai. You cannot start with the cross. You have to go all the way back to the very first time. The text draws our eyes upward. The world has just drowned in an apocalyptic flood. The chaotic waters are finally receding, and the first piece of solid ground to tear through the surface of the deep is not a beach. The hull scrapes violently against submerged stone. Thick gopher wood timbers groan under the shifting weight. The endless gray horizon of water breaks against dark, jagged basalt. Noah pushes open a heavy wooden window to the freezing wind. A dove flies out into the vast emptiness. The water is finally retreating. We treat this story like a nursery rhyme. Animals marching 2 by 2. A brightly colored rainbow in the clouds. A million weary refugees stand paralyzed in the dirt, staring up at a peak wrapped in thick black smoke. A happy family stepping onto dry, sunlit grass. We sanitize the terror of it. We domesticate the apocalypse. But the ancient Hebrew reader saw something entirely different. They saw an uncreation. God taking the cosmos backward, returning the earth to the dark, chaotic waters of Genesis 1. The world is wiped clean. The slate is forcefully erased. A heavy stench of wet rot and mud covers the globe. And then, a single peak breaks the surface. Mount Ararat. It is the first piece of solid earth. It is the first dry ground in a drowned world. This is the exact moment the biblical pattern is established. The high ground becomes the new Eden. God starts over on the summit. In the ancient mind, the sea is death. The sea is the abyss that swallows life. To survive the sea, you must ascend. You must find the mountain. When Noah steps out into the thin, biting altitude, he does not immediately build a house. He builds an altar. He stacks unhewn stones. Blood is spilled. Smoke rises from the burning sacrifice. The sharp smell of charred meat drifts into the cold sky. And God speaks a covenant. He hangs his weapon, his bow, in the clouds. He promises to never uncreate the world again. Look at the sequence. A mountain, an altar, deafened by the sound of a trumpet blast that shatters the morning. A bruised and hunted prophet buries his face. A sacrifice, a covenant, a new humanity. Ararat is not a landing pad for a drifting ship. It is the womb of a second creation. The mountain becomes the theological high ground. It is the sanctuary elevated above the chaos. The floodwaters could not drown the peak of God's new beginning. Ararat teaches us the baseline rule for the rest of the biblical text. The mountain is where God resets the timeline. It is where he anchors his promises into the bedrock of the earth. But Ararat is only the prologue. It introduces the architecture. It establishes the grammar of the elevation. Because generations later, another father will walk up another mountain in the land of Canaan. But this time, he is not seeking refuge from a global flood. He is carrying a torch, a hunting knife, and the wood for a very different kind of sacrifice. Dust kicks up around the worn leather of Abraham's sandals as the incline grows steeper. Beside him walks a young man, the rough, splintering bark of cut wood chafing against his shoulders. In Abraham's hand is the fire, carried in a clay pot, and the heavy, cold bronze of a hunting knife. The silence between them is thick, pressing down on the 3-day journey, until Isaac finally asks the question that shatters the quiet air. The fire and wood are here. But where is the lamb? In his heavy wool cloak, at the mouth of a high-altitude cave, listening for a voice in the freezing air. Genesis chapter 22 places us on Mount Moriah. It is a devastating scene. Abraham binds the wrists of his promised son, laying him on top of the unhewn stones. The knife is raised. The trajectory of biblical history hangs suspended in the freezing wind of the summit. Then, the voice breaks through. The blade drops. A ram is found thrashing in a nearby thicket. Its curved horns caught in the dense brush. The boy breathes again. The blood of the substitute stains the altar. And, in the aftermath of the adrenaline and the terror, Abraham names the peak. In our English translations, Genesis 22:14 says Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide," or Jehovah Jireh. We have turned it into a bumper sticker. We use it to mean God will pay our bills or fix our circumstances. But the word Abraham actually speaks is the Hebrew yireh. It comes from the primary root verb ra'ah, which means something much more visceral. It means to see, to look at, to perceive, literally. Abraham names the mountain, "The Lord will see," or "In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen." In the Western mind, seeing and providing are two different actions. You can observe a tragedy from a distance without doing anything to stop it. But in the ancient Hebrew consciousness, sight and action are permanently fused. When God looks, his gaze is not passive observation. 3 fishermen fall trembling to their knees on a summit as the face of their rabbi suddenly shines brighter than the midday sun. For the God of Israel to truly see a desperate need is for him to immediately move to meet it. The provision is the inevitable physical manifestation of his sight. That linguistic root changes everything about what happens on Moriah. Moriah is not a mountain of transaction. It is the mountain of the divine gaze. God did not just drop a ram out of the sky. He looked at the agony of a father and the vulnerability of a son. And his seeing became their salvation. To be seen by God is to be rescued by him. Abraham and Isaac walk back down into the valley, carrying a new understanding of the elevation. The mountain is where the substitute is caught in the thorns. But this is only a family, a singular father and son. Centuries later, the descendants of this surviving boy will multiply into an entire nation. They will march out of an Egyptian empire of chains, dragging their generational trauma into a desolate wilderness. And they will stop at the base of another peak. Only this time, the mountain will not be silent. It will be on fire. We project our modern anxieties about authority onto the ancient text. When we think of Mount Sinai, we picture a cosmic courtroom. Up, it always happens up. If you read the biblical text just looking for the narrative plot points, you might think the geography is accidental. We imagine a dictator in the clouds, reading terms and conditions to a cowering, traumatized crowd. We view the 10 Commandments as a cage, a list of behavioral demands from a deity who demands compliance or threatens death. We read the smell of ozone, the deafening blast of the shofar, and the physical vibration of the rock beneath their sandals as intimidation. But we are misreading the terrain. In the ancient Near Eastern world, you do not use a mountain to write a penal code. Sinai is not a courtroom. It is a wedding altar. Look at the structure of the event. God brings a liberated people to the base of the peak. He washes them. He clothes them. He descends in a thick cloud, a kuppah, a traditional Jewish wedding canopy made of smoke and fire. The cold stone tablets are not a list of restrictions. They are a ketubah, a marriage contract. Egypt was the abusive master. Sinai is the devoted groom. Egypt demanded bricks without straw. Sinai offers rest on the 7th day. Egypt broke their bodies. Sinai crowns them as a kingdom of priests. If feeling the weight of this ancient wedding changes how you read the text, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the vows are spoken into the desert air. A mountain is simply a convenient, dramatic setting. A quiet place away from the noise of the crowds. The mountain shakes, not with the rage of a judge, but with the terrifying weight of divine commitment. God is binding himself to a broken, anxious people. He is writing his name onto their identity. The elevation is necessary because a covenant this massive requires a sanctuary that cannot be manufactured by human hands. But a wedding altar of fire is difficult to endure. The proximity is too intense. The people eventually pull back. They ask Moses to go up alone. They choose the safety of the flatlands over the terrifying intimacy of the summit. And the fire of Sinai eventually fades into history. The mountain goes quiet until centuries later, a bruised, and hunted man runs back to this exact same peak. He is not leading a nation. He is hiding in a cave, begging to die. And he is about to discover what the mountain sounds like when the fire goes out. The prophet runs for 40 days. He crosses the blistering desert of Beersheba. His sandals wear thin against the jagged gravel. His lungs burn in the dry, dead air. He is fleeing a furious queen. He is fleeing his own failed expectations. He thinks he is the only faithful man left on earth. He begs God to take his life. And he finally collapses at the base of Mount Horeb, a tactical high ground for a story's climax. Most people assume the terrain is just the backdrop for the action. This is Sinai. It is the exact same peak where Moses stood centuries earlier. Elijah climbs into a narrow, dark cave. The stone walls are freezing against his spine. He pulls his heavy wool mantle over his face. He wants to disappear in the dark, but the voice calls him out. God tells him to stand on the summit. Then, the chaos begins. A hurricane-force wind rips through the canyons. It violently splinters the massive basalt boulders. Stone shrapnel flies through the freezing air. But God is not in the wind. An earthquake violently shakes the ground. The mountain vibrates under his bruised feet. But God is not in the earthquake. A fire sweeps across the high ridge. The scrub brush burns instantly to black ash. The sharp smell of smoke fills the thin air. But God is not in the fire. Then, the chaos stops. The air grows completely still, and a sound emerges. Our English Bibles usually translate this as a still small voice. But the Hebrew text uses the word demama. It is a brilliant, paradoxical word. It means a whisper. It also means a dead silence. It is the heavy, loaded quiet that follows a violent storm. Elijah hears the demama. He steps out to the edge of the cliff. He wraps his face tightly in his cloak. He knows exactly what is happening.